I'm Abigail Thompson, 28. And 6 months ago, my mother's joke at our family dinner changed everything. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would miss you. She laughed after I mentioned canceling plans again. The table fell silent. My sister Emma looked away. Dad studied his plate. No one defended me. 3 weeks later, I took her words to heart and disappeared from their lives completely. Today, as I watch them from across the crowded restaurant, my family celebrating my birthday without me, I realize they hadn't even noticed I was gone. They never filed a missing persons report. Before I tell you how I went from invisible daughter to the person who turned my entire family's world upside down, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If my story of finally standing up to my toxic family resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true family drama stories that prove karma eventually comes for everyone. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up as the middle child between my older sister Emma and younger brother Jason was like existing in the negative space of a family portrait. Emma, now 32, was always the brilliant one valedictorian, full scholarship to medical school, and now a rising star surgeon at Boston Memorial. Jason, 24, was the charming baby of the family who could do no wrong. By the time he turned 21, his tech startup had already secured its first round of serious funding. My parents' faces literally glowed when they talked about their children well, those 2 children. Then there was me, the middle child, the unremarkable one, Abigail Marie Thompson. With her sensible career as a book editor at a respectable but not prestigious publishing house, my achievements were acknowledged with a polite "that's nice, dear," before the conversation quickly shifted back to Emma's latest medical breakthrough or Jason's newest innovation. Abby has always been our steady one. My mother Margaret would say at family gatherings, as if being dependable was some consolation prize for not being exceptional. She doesn't need the spotlight. The truth was, I didn't even know if I wanted the spotlight because I'd never been offered it. When I graduated with honors from college, my ceremony was cut short because we had to rush to Emma's medical school award dinner. When I got my first promotion, the family celebration was hijacked by the news of Jason securing his first investor. Pattern after pattern, year after year. My father, Robert, was emotionally absent at the best of times. A corporate attorney who communicated primarily through grunts and nods, he saved his rare displays of enthusiasm for Emma's academic achievements and Jason's business ventures. I once overheard him telling his golf buddy, 2 out of 3 isn't bad, when discussing his children. I pretended not to hear, but my mother, her dismissal cut deeper because it came disguised as humor. Abby's just going through a phase. She'd say when I was 12, 16, 22, 27, as if my entire existence was just a temporary inconvenience she was waiting to pass. Her jokes often had teeth. If Abby put half as much effort into her career as she does into those books she reads, she might actually make something of herself. Cue the laugh. Cue the uncomfortable silence. Cue me, smiling tightly, playing along. 6 months ago, I was at a low point. My fiancé Daniel had left me for Kendra, a vivacious marketing executive at my publishing house. The diamond ring I'd worn for 11 months was returned in a manila envelope left on my desk with a post-it note saying, "Sorry, you deserve better." 2 weeks later, I was passed over for the senior editor position I'd been working toward for 5 years. The job went to a newer editor with fresh perspectives and a Yale connection to the publisher. Then came the fateful family dinner. Emma had just been appointed head of the neurosurgery department at 32, the youngest in the hospital's history. My parents arranged an elaborate celebration at Rossini's, the expensive Italian restaurant they reserved for major family milestones. I was running late because of a last-minute manuscript crisis that needed immediate attention. When I finally arrived 40 minutes late, they were already on their second bottle of wine. My empty chair accusatory. "Well, look who finally decided to join us," my mother said, glass in hand. "I was just telling Emma we should order your food to go." "Sorry," I said, slipping into my seat. Work emergency. My father barely looked up from his phone. What kind of emergency happens at a publishing house? It's not like you're saving lives. Emma at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We ordered you the eggplant parmesan," Jason said. the only one who acknowledged what I might actually want. "Thanks," I said, unfolding my napkin. "Congratulations, Emma. That's really amazing news." Emma smiled. "Thanks, Abby. It's been crazy. I still can't believe they chose me." "Of course they chose you," my mother beamed. "You've always been exceptional." The dinner progressed as these family gatherings always did. Emma's accomplishment was dissected and celebrated from every angle. Jason talked about his company's expansion plans. My father discussed his golf game and recent court victory. My mother orchestrated the conversation like a symphony conductor, ensuring the spotlight moved precisely where she wanted it. When the attention finally, briefly, turned to me, it was my mother who asked, "So, Abby, anything new with you? Still recovering from Daniel, I assume?" The table fell awkwardly silent. "Actually," I said, finding a small spark of pride, "I'm working with a promising new author. His manuscript could be really special." "That's nice, dear," my mother replied automatically. "Emma, tell everyone about that new surgical technique you're pioneering." I felt myself disappearing into the background again, fading like old wallpaper. I checked my phone to find a text from my one close friend, Layla, canceling our weekend plans. Something better had come up. "I might have to cancel our Sunday brunch," I said quietly. "Layla can't make it on Saturday, so we're rescheduling." That's when my mother said it, with a dismissive wave of her hand and a chuckle meant to sound lighthearted. "Honestly, Abby, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even miss you." The table fell silent. A water glass froze halfway to Emma's lips. My father suddenly found his plate fascinating. Jason stared at our mother in shock, and I felt something inside me crack wide open. My mother, realizing the joke had landed poorly, quickly added, "I'm just teasing, darling. You know how you always cancel plans. You're so reliable at being unreliable." She laughed again, but no one joined her. I smiled tightly and excused myself to the bathroom. Standing before the mirror, I stared at my reflection, a woman I barely recognized anymore. Tears threatened, but I held them back with practiced ease. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved on as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. My mother had finally spoken the truth that had haunted our family dynamic for years. I was dispensable, forgettable, missable. The dinner ended with hugs and kisses and promises to get together soon. I drove home alone to my empty apartment, her words echoing in my head like a curse or perhaps a challenge. "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even miss you." That night, I cried until there were no tears left. Then I sat on my balcony until sunrise, watching the city lights and making a decision that would change everything. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange haze of clarity and purpose. I researched how to disappear online, clearing my browser history meticulously after each session. What started as an emotional reaction gradually transformed into a detailed plan. I was surprised by how many resources existed for people wanting to vanish. Most were aimed at those fleeing abuse or stalkers, but the principles remained the same. First, I secured my finances. I withdrew cash in amounts small enough not to trigger any alerts, $2,000 here, $3,000 there. I opened a new bank account under my legal name, but at a different bank, transferring funds gradually. I applied for a new credit card that my family didn't know about. I waited for any of them to call, to check on me after that dinner. My phone remained silent. The silence was confirmation. Throughout those 3 weeks, not a single family member reached out. No hey, about what mom said. Text from Emma. No awkward emoji from Jason. No call from my father. And certainly nothing from my mother herself. Their silence said everything her joke had already told me. I was the afterthought of the family, the one who wasn't worth the effort. I gave notice at my job, citing personal reasons and the need for a fresh start. My boss seemed genuinely sorry to see me go, but didn't press for details. I sold my furniture on marketplace apps, donated clothes I wouldn't need, and packed the rest into 2 suitcases. I found a subletter for my apartment through the end of my lease. The physical transformation came next. I'd always worn my light brown hair long the same style since high school. At an out-of-town salon, I had it cut into a short bob and dyed a rich auburn. I bought glasses with clear frames, though my vision was perfect. Small changes that together created a version of me my family would walk past on the street. I practiced introducing myself as Amy Taylor, a name common enough to be forgettable, but not so basic it would raise suspicions. Amy was from Michigan, originally a state I'd visited twice, enough to speak about it conversationally. She worked remotely in content creation, vague but plausible. She was quiet but friendly. She didn't have social media because she preferred real connections. Amy was the person I would become. On my last night in my apartment, surrounded by empty shelves and bare walls, I wrote letters to each family member that I knew I would never send. I poured out years of hurt, of feeling invisible, of trying desperately to matter. I burned them in the kitchen sink, watching the ashes swirl down the drain. I left Boston on a Tuesday morning, driving west in the used Honda I'd purchased with cash from a private seller. I didn't have a specific destination in mind initially, just a way. But as I crossed state lines, Portland, Oregon kept appearing in my thoughts. I'd visited once for a publishing conference and remembered liking its combination of urban culture and natural beauty. Most importantly, it was over 3,000 miles from my family. The cross-country drive took 6 days. I stayed in cheap motels under my new name, paid in cash, and kept to myself. I spoke to no one except servers and gas station attendants. It was as if Abigail Thompson was already fading away, mile by mile. Portland welcomed me with 3 days of rain. I found a small studio apartment in the southeast neighborhood through a private landlord who didn't require extensive background check. The place was tiny but clean, with large windows and a view of a flowering magnolia tree. I paid 3 months' rent up front in cash. Finding work was surprisingly easy. A help wanted sign in the window of an independent bookstore called Rainy Day Books caught my eye. The owner, a woman named Diane with gray dreadlocks and kind eyes, hired me after a brief conversation about favorite authors. The job didn't pay much, but it covered my modest expenses and surrounded me with books, the one constant comfort in my life. The first 2 months were the hardest. I jumped whenever my phone rang, now with a new number. I constantly looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see my mother's disapproving face or my father's indifferent one. At night, I often woke in a panic, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Sometimes I'd reach for my laptop, tempted to email my family, just to see if they'd noticed I was gone. But I resisted. Instead, I created rules for my new life. No social media, no contacting anyone from before, no giving personal details to strangers. I was rebuilding myself from scratch. Occasionally, I would use a public library computer to check my family's social media accounts. Emma posted about surgical successes and hospital fundraisers. Jason shared tech conferences and rock climbing trips. My mother showcased elegant dinner parties and charity events. My father didn't have social media. Not once did any of them mention a missing daughter or sister. There were no desperate pleas for information. No, "Have you seen this woman?" posts. The most telling moment came 2 months after my disappearance, when I checked the local Boston news websites and police reports. Nothing. They hadn't filed a missing persons report, hadn't alerted authorities, hadn't even noticed, or if they hadn't cared enough to look for me. My mother's words had proven prophetic. I had disappeared, and no one missed me. This confirmation should have devastated me. Instead, it felt strangely liberating. If they didn't miss me, I was under no obligation to miss them. I was free in a way I'd never been before. Free to discover who Abigail knew, who Amy really was. "Hey, Amy, can you cover the register while I take these boxes to the back?" Jillian asked, her arms full of newly arrived books. "Sure thing," I replied, setting aside the literary fiction display I'd been arranging. 5 months had passed since I'd arrived in Portland, and Rainy Day Books had become something of a sanctuary. Jillian, a tattooed English literature graduate with purple-tipped hair and a sardonic sense of humor, had been friendly from my first day. Our conversations about books gradually expanded to include movies, music, and eventually, personal lives, or at least the version of a personal life I was willing to share. "You're an enigma, Amy Taylor," Jillian had declared one night over post-work beers. "I can't figure out if you're running from the law or a bad breakup." I'd laughed it off. Nothing so dramatic. Just needed a change of scenery. But Jillian wasn't the only one who had noticed my guarded nature. Mrs. Reynolds, My 6-year-old neighbor who brought me homemade bread once a week saw through me immediately. "You remind me of myself at your age," she said one evening as we shared tea in her apartment filled with books and plants. I recognized the look of someone who started over. "Don't worry, I won't pry. But if you ever need to talk, my door is always open." I found myself accepting her invitation more and more often. There was something comforting about her presence. No expectations, no judgment, just quiet acceptance. But it was Dr. Martin who helped me truly begin to heal. Finding a therapist had been a terrifying step. What if she asked questions I couldn't answer? What if she insisted I contact my family? But Dr. Martin, with her calm demeanor and direct approach, never pushed me to reveal more than I was ready to share. "I'm not here to force reconciliations or uncover your secrets," she said during our first session. "I'm here to help you understand yourself better, whatever name you're using." The look she gave me made it clear she suspected my identity wasn't entirely authentic, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she asked about my current feelings, my daily life, my hopes for the future. Over the weeks, I gradually revealed more about my family, though I was careful with specific details. I talked about growing up as the invisible middle child, about a mother who used humor as a weapon, about a father who barely noticed me. "What you're describing sounds like a pattern of emotional neglect," Dr. Martin said during one particularly difficult session. "Being the forgotten child can be just as damaging as more overt forms of abuse." "But they never hit me or anything," I protested weakly. "Emotional wounds don't leave bruises, but they can cut just as deep," she replied. "Often deeper because they're harder to identify and explain to others." Those sessions became my anchors, helping me understand that my feelings were valid, that my decision to leave while extreme had come from a place of genuine self-preservation. As the months passed, I began to discover who I was without my family's expectations and limitations. I joined a writing group that met Tuesday evenings at a local coffee shop. For the first time, I shared my own stories rather than just editing others. The positive feedback was both surprising and affirming. I volunteered at a literacy program for immigrant children, finding unexpected joy in helping young readers discover the magic of books. I tried rock climbing at Jillian's insistence and discovered I had a natural aptitude for it. I adopted a one-eyed cat from the shelter and named him Gatsby. Through it all, I kept a journal documenting my transformation. I wrote about the anger that occasionally surged through me when I remembered past slights and injuries. I wrote about the grief for the family I wished I'd had. I wrote about the freedom of building an identity based on my own choices rather than others' perceptions. "The thing about being the invisible middle child," I wrote one evening, "is that you become an expert observer. You watch how people interact, how they manipulate, how they love and hurt each other. You see everything because no one is watching you. It's a painful education, but a thorough one." As I approached the 6-month mark of my disappearance, I felt both stronger and more curious. What was happening back in Boston? Had my absence created even a ripple in their lives? Despite my best efforts to move forward, those questions lingered. One night, after a particularly good therapy session where Dr. Martin had praised my progress, I allowed myself to check my family's social media accounts again. I expected the usual Emma's medical accomplishments, Jason's tech adventures, my mother's social climbing. What I didn't expect was a photo of my entire family at Le Bistro, my favorite restaurant in Boston, gathered around a table with a birthday cake. My birthday cake, the caption read, "Missing you always, especially today, number family first." I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. They were celebrating my birthday without me, not just continuing with their lives, but actively performing grief on social media while having made zero genuine efforts to find me. The rage and hurt that flooded through me was so intense I felt physically ill. 6 months of therapy, of rebuilding, of healing, and one Instagram post had ripped the wound wide open again. Without fully thinking it through, I booked a flight to Boston for the following week. It was time to see for myself what my disappearance had really meant to them. Boston looked exactly the same, which was somehow shocking. The city should have transformed as dramatically as I had. Instead, it welcomed me back with familiar streets and landmarks, indifferent to my 6-month absence. I checked into a downtown hotel under my new name, wearing a stylish black bob wig over my now auburn hair. Large sunglasses completed the disguise, not that any of my family would be looking for me. Still, I couldn't risk being recognized before I was ready. Social media had informed me that my family had dinner reservations at Le Bistro for 7 p.m., a remembrance dinner for me, according to my mother's carefully worded post. The irony was almost too much to bear. I arrived at 6:30 and requested a table with a clear view of the restaurant's center, where they always seated larger parties. The hostess, a new hire who wouldn't recognize me, led me to a perfect spot partially concealed behind a decorative plant but with an unobstructed sightline to what would be my family's table. My hands shook slightly as I pretended to study the menu. I'd rehearsed this moment countless times in my head, but now that it was happening, I felt unprepared. What exactly was I hoping to see? Some evidence that they missed me? Or confirmation that they didn't? They arrived precisely on time. My mother leading the procession in an elegant black dress, her tasteful morning outfit, though I was very much alive. My father followed in his standard gray suit. Emma and Jason came next, along with Jason's new girlfriend Melissa, whom I'd never met. To my surprise, several extended family members trailed behind Aunt Judith, Uncle Carl, my cousins Rachel and Mark. They were seated at a large round table, the exact table where we'd celebrated my college graduation years ago. The waitstaff brought champagne immediately, apparently pre-ordered. My mother raised her glass for a toast. I couldn't hear from my position, but her performance was flawless. Solemn face, gentle smile, the perfect portrait of a grieving mother. I ordered a glass of wine and sipped it slowly, watching the family dynamics unfold from a perspective I'd never had before. My mother dominated the conversation as usual, touching her eyes occasionally with a tissue. My father checked his watch repeatedly. Emma seemed genuinely subdued, glancing occasionally at the empty chair they'd included at the table, a theatrical touch that made my blood boil. Jason seemed uncomfortable, fidgeting with his silverware. His girlfriend Melissa, however, was fully engaged in the family performance, and on her wrist, I nearly gasped aloud, was my grandmother's silver bracelet, a family heirloom that had been promised to me since childhood. I forced myself to take slow, measured breaths as I continued my observation. Cousin Rachel approached my mother, saying something that caused a fleeting look of irritation to cross Margaret Thompson's perfectly composed face. I couldn't hear their exchange, but I could read lips well enough to catch my mother's response. She's just being dramatic as usual. She'll turn up when she wants attention. The dismissal was so casual, so consistent with how she'd always talked about me, that I almost laughed. Even in my absence, I was the family disappointment. Minutes later, I watched my mother speaking to Aunt Judith, clearly explaining something with animated gestures. This time, I could hear fragments. Traveling abroad. Sabbatical. Finding herself. My disappearance had been reframed as a selfish adventure, an abandonment rather than an escape. I was the villain in their story, not the victim. The realization hit me with physical force, sending me hurrying to the bathroom where I locked myself in a stall, trying to control my breathing as a panic attack threatened to overwhelm me. "You're okay," I whispered to myself, using techniques Dr. Martin had taught me. "You're safe. Their narrative doesn't define you." As my breathing steadied, anger replaced panic. They hadn't just failed to look for me, they'd created a convenient fiction to explain my absence while casting themselves as the injured parties. I splashed cold water on my face and reapplied my lipstick, staring at my reflection so different from the woman who had sat at that family table 6 months ago. My eyes had changed the most. They were clearer now, more focused. The eyes of someone who saw the truth. Returning to my table, I nearly collided with a woman heading to the bathroom. She steadied herself, apologizing before looking up. "No problem," I murmured, heart racing as I recognized Sophia Peters, my childhood friend who drifted into my sister's social circle years ago. She smiled politely, not a flicker of recognition in her eyes, before continuing to the bathroom. The encounter solidified something in me. If someone who'd known me for 20 years couldn't recognize me now, I was truly free to control how and when I revealed myself to my family. And I knew with sudden clarity that I would reveal myself, not today, but soon, and on my terms. I paid my bill and left the restaurant, pausing outside to look back through the window at the family gathering still in progress. They were now eating cake, my favorite lemon raspberry cake that Le Bistro made, specially laughing and talking as if it were any normal celebration. Perhaps to them, it was. I've been watching my family from the shadows for 6 months now, seeing the truth of our dynamics with painful clarity. And what I've witnessed tonight has confirmed what I suspected all along. The story they tell themselves about me bears little resemblance to reality. If you've ever been the invisible member of your family, you know exactly how it feels to be spoken about rather than spoken to have your narrative controlled by others. Drop a comment below if you've experienced this too, and let me know if you're still watching. The next part of my story gets even more intense as I prepare to shake my family's perfectly constructed world to its core. Back in my hotel room, anger fueled action. I created a new email account under the name Truth Teller and began crafting messages to each family member. These wouldn't be emotional outpourings or accusatory rants. They would be precise strikes at the carefully maintained facades each of them had built. For my father, I wrote, Subject: Robert Thompson's Hidden Truths. Before you married Margaret, you told your brother Carl you were settling because your true love had married someone else. You said you were making the practical choice. You still keep her photograph hidden in your study desk. What would your perfect family think if they knew you've been living a compromise for 35 years? For my mother, Subject: The bottom of Margaret's bottles. The recycling bin tells stories the family doesn't discuss. Specifically, how those headache pills you take in the afternoon are actually for managing your daily drinking. The vodka bottles hidden behind the cleaning supplies in the laundry room cabinet would shock your charity committee, wouldn't they? Abigail knew. She always knew. For Emma, Subject: Harvard Medical School's Honor Code. Your breakthrough research paper that launched your career was based on data you manipulated. Professor Whitman suspected, but couldn't prove it. You confessed to Abigail after 3 glasses of wine at her apartment, the night you received the Emerging Researcher Award. Does the hospital board know their youngest department head built her career on falsified data? For Jason, Subject: Financial discrepancies at Next Gen Tech. Your startup's books don't balance. Investor money has been funding your rock climbing trips and that Audi, not just business development. The SEC takes a dim view of such creative accounting. Abigail saw the spreadsheets you accidentally left open on her laptop when you borrowed it last Thanksgiving. I sent each email from a public library computer, then returned to my hotel to wait. I didn't have to wait long. Within 2 hours, my carefully placed digital bombs detonated. I had access to Emma's iCloud calendar thanks to an old shared family calendar she'd never removed me from. A notification popped up. Emergency family meeting, 9 p.m., parents' house. I smiled. The timing was perfect. Their panic would have maximum impact if they had to stew overnight before they could take action. The next morning, I rented a car and drove to my parents' suburban home, arriving just before noon. They would all be at work, giving me ample time. The spare key was still hidden in the fake rock by the garage. Some things never changed. Years ago, when Jason was going through his tech genius phase, he had installed a security system in our parents' house that included interior cameras and microphones. The system had been abandoned when he moved on to his next project, but I knew it still functioned. Jason had shown me how to access it from an app when he first installed it. Proud of his creation, I sat in my rental car down the street, opened the forgotten app on my new phone, and entered the password that hadn't been changed in years. Jason Genius 2016. Just as I expected, another emergency family meeting had been scheduled for 7 p.m. I would have front row seats to their panic, all from the safety of my car. At 6:45, they began arriving. My father first, then Emma, then Jason. My mother would already be home. I activated the audio on the system and settled in to listen. This is insane, my father was saying as he paced the living room. Who would know these things? Who's threatening us? My mother sat rigidly on the sofa, a glass of iced tea in her hand that I knew contained more vodka than tea. It has to be someone close to us. The emails were too specific. It's blackmail, Jason insisted. They'll ask for money next. That's how these things work. Emma hadn't spoken yet. She sat in the armchair, pale and drawn. What if it's Abby? She finally said, her voice barely audible. The room fell silent. Don't be ridiculous, my mother snapped. Abby's off finding herself or whatever she's doing. She wouldn't do something like this, wouldn't she? Emma countered. She's been gone for 6 months. 6 months, Mom, and we haven't even filed a police report. Because she left voluntarily, my father interjected. Her apartment was emptied properly. Her job resignation was handled professionally. She clearly planned to leave. But why? Emma pressed. What if something happened to her? What if these emails are from someone who knows what happened? Nothing happened to her, my mother said dismissively, taking a large sip from her glass. Abby has always been theatrical. Remember how she sulked for weeks when we had to leave her college graduation early for your award dinner? She's punishing us, that's all. I felt a cold shock hearing her words. My mother didn't just dismiss me, she actively resented me for having feelings about being dismissed. Actually, Jason said slowly, I've been thinking the same thing as Emma. These emails, they mention things only Abby would know. That night, I used her laptop. The conversation with Emma about her research. That's ridiculous, my father said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. If Abby wanted to confront us, why not just do it directly? Because we wouldn't listen, Emma said quietly. We never did. Another silence fell over the room. Well, I for one am relieved she's gone, my mother said suddenly, refilling her glass from a pitcher that sat on the coffee table. She was always watching, judging, making me feel like I was performing for an audience in my own home. Margaret, my father exclaimed. Oh, stop it, Robert. You felt it too. Abby was the conscience we never wanted, always observing, always noting our failings. Jason's creative accounting, Emma's research methods, your emotional distance, my coping mechanisms. She gestured with her glass. She saw too much and said too little. It was unnerving. I felt tears streaming down my face as I listened. My mother had articulated exactly what my role had been in the family, the silent witness, the keeper of secrets, the one who saw everything but whose observations were never welcomed. So what do we do now? Jason asked after another long pause. We need to find her, my father said, his voice taking on the tone he used for business problems. Not just because of these emails, but because it's been 6 months. It's time to acknowledge that this isn't normal. I'll hire someone, he continued, already pulling out his phone. A private investigator. Discreet, professional. And what if these emails aren't from Abby? Emma asked. What if something has happened to her, and someone else knows our secrets? One problem at a time, my father replied. First, we find Abby, then we deal with whatever this is. I shut off the app, my hands shaking. They were looking for me now, not out of love or concern, but out of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of consequences, fear of the truth. I drove back to my hotel, mind racing. The plan had changed. I had intended to observe from a distance, perhaps send more revelatory emails, slowly unraveling their comfortable lies. But now they were actively searching. The timeline had accelerated. If they were going to find me, it would be on my terms, not theirs. The private investigator my father hired was good, very good. It took him just 2 weeks to trace me to Portland, and another 3 days to locate rainy day books. I was shelving new arrivals when I sensed someone watching me. Looking up, I met the steady gaze of a man in his 40s with observant eyes and a neutral expression. Miss Thompson? He asked quietly, approaching the shelf where I worked. My heart raced, but I kept my face composed. I'm Amy Taylor. May I speak with you privately? My name is Nathan Reed. I'm a private investigator hired by the Thompson family. I glanced around the nearly empty bookstore, then nodded toward the small break room in the back. 5 minutes. Once inside with the door closed, I crossed my arms defensively. How did you find me? It's my job, he said simply. You were careful, but there are always traces. The Honda you bought in cash. The writing group membership under your new name but paid for with a card link to your old bank. Small threads that led here. I nodded, surprisingly calm now that the moment had arrived. So what happens next? You call my father and collect your fee? Nathan Reed studied me for a long moment. That depends. When I took this case, I expected to find someone in trouble. A young woman who'd encountered problems, maybe gotten mixed up in something dangerous. Instead, I found someone who's built a new life. Someone who seems happier. I am happier, I said softly. I've also uncovered some concerning patterns in your family dynamics, he continued. The Thompson family has an impressive public image, but my investigation revealed some troubling undercurrents. I laughed without humor. You don't know the half of it. I think I do, he replied, surprising me. I'm very thorough, Miss Thompson. I spoke with former household staff, neighbors, your ex-fiancé, college friends who lost touch with you. The pattern was clear and consistent. He paused. I have an ethical dilemma. I was hired to find you, but I'm not convinced reporting back serves your best interests. I studied him, searching for deception and finding none. What are you suggesting? I could tell them I hit a dead end. That the trail went cold in Chicago. It would buy you time. Why would you do that? He shrugged. Because sometimes doing the right thing means not doing what you're paid to do. I considered his offer, tempted by the reprieve it would provide. But something had shifted in me during these months away. I was tired of hiding, tired of others controlling the narrative of my life. No, I said finally. They'd just hire someone else. Someone who might not have your scruples. Tell them you found me. His eyebrows raised in surprise. Are you sure? Yes. But tell them I'll contact them on my terms, and give me 24 hours before you report back. He nodded slowly. I can do that. Thank you, I said, extending my hand, which he shook firmly. For what it's worth, he said as he turned to leave. You've built something good here. Don't let them take that from you. After he left, I called Dr. Martin and scheduled an emergency session. Then I contacted Jillian and Mrs. Reynolds, asking if they could meet for dinner that evening. If I was going to face my family, I needed my support system. Over the next 24 hours, I prepared meticulously. I gathered evidence journal entries documenting patterns of neglect, emails showing broken promises, screenshots of social media posts celebrating my siblings while ignoring my achievement. I recorded myself reading a statement detailing my experience in the family, both for my own clarity and as potential protection. Dr. Martin helped me establish clear boundaries for the confrontation. Jillian offered her unwavering loyalty and the promise of a place to stay if things went sideways. Mrs. Reynolds gave me her late husband's pocket watch, saying simply, "To remind you that time is precious, and you've already wasted too much of it being invisible." I booked a flight to Boston for the following day. Nathan Reed texted that he had reported finding me, but had emphasized I would make contact on my terms. My father had apparently been furious, but had little choice but to accept the arrangement. Sunday dinner had always been sacred in the Thompson household. No matter what tension simmered beneath the surface, Sunday at 6 p.m. found the family gathered around the dining room table. I knew they would all be there, especially now, waiting for word from the private investigator. I arrived at 6:30. When the main course would typically be served, I wore my real hair, now grown out a bit from the bob, and returned to its natural brown. I dressed simply in black slacks and a blue blouse professional. Confident, myself. I rang the doorbell and waited, heart pounding but resolve firm. My father opened the door, words already forming on his lips, likely expecting the private investigator. He froze mid-syllable, staring at me as if seeing a ghost. "Hello, Dad," I said calmly. "I hear you've been looking for me." He continued to stare, mouth opening and closing without sound. Behind him, I heard my mother's voice. "Robert? Who is it?" I stepped past him into the foyer. "I've come for Sunday dinner," I called out. "I hope there's enough food for one more." I walked into the dining room, where my mother, Emma, and Jason sat around the table laden with my mother's typical Sunday spread. Crystal glasses, fine china, the performance of perfect family dining. My entrance created a tableau of shock that would have been comical under different circumstances. My mother's wine glass tipped over, spreading a red stain across the white tablecloth. Emma half rose from her chair, hand covering her mouth. Jason simply stared, fork suspended midway to his mouth. "I hear you've been looking for me," I repeated, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Abigail." My mother finally managed her composure fracturing visibly. "Where have you been? We've been worried sick." "Have you?" I asked mildly. "That's strange, because no one filed a missing persons report. No one contacted the police. No one seemed to notice I was gone until I made you notice. My father had followed me into the room, his lawyer face now firmly in place. Abigail, this behavior is completely unacceptable. Do you have any idea what you've put this family through? I laughed a genuine laugh of disbelief. What I've put you through? That's rich. Coming from people who celebrated my birthday without me and told relatives I was traveling abroad finding myself. How do you know about that? My mother demanded, attempting to blot the wine stain with her napkin. I was there, I said simply. At Le Bistro, 5 tables away, watching you perform grief while discussing my dramatic tendencies. The silence that followed was deafening. And yes, I continued into that silence. I sent those emails. I thought it was time for some honest communication in this family, since we've never managed it before. You had no right, my father began, but Emma cut him off. She had every right, my sister said quietly. We deserved it. All eyes turned to Emma, who looked at me directly for the first time. I'm so sorry, Abby. I've been a terrible sister. Don't be ridiculous, Emma, my mother interjected. You've done nothing wrong. Abby is clearly going through some sort of breakdown. Stop it, Mom, Jason said suddenly. Just stop. Abby's not having a breakdown. She's finally standing up for herself. My mother's face flushed with anger. So this is how it's going to be? All of you turning against me when I've done nothing but sacrifice for this family? This isn't about you, Margaret, my father said wearily, sitting down heavily in his chair. For once, this isn't about you. I remained standing, watching the family dynamics shift in real time, the alliances forming and breaking, the truth beginning to crack through the carefully maintained facade. I didn't come here to tear the family apart, I said finally. I came because I refused to be erased. I refused to be the joke at the dinner table, the afterthought, the one who could disappear without anyone noticing. I placed a folder on the table. I've written everything down, how it felt growing up as the invisible middle child, the patterns of emotional neglect, the dismissal of my feelings and achievements. I'm not asking you to read it now, but I am asking you to read it eventually. To really see me, maybe for the first time. I took a deep breath. I've built a new life. A good life, with people who actually see me. I'm not coming back to Boston, but I am giving you the chance to be part of my life going forward if you're willing to do it on different terms. My mother made a dismissive sound, but my father silenced her with a look. What terms? He asked, his voice stripped of its usual authority. Respect, honesty, actual interest in my life, and therapy, family therapy, if you want a relationship with me. Individual therapy regardless. This is absurd, my mother muttered. Take it or leave it, I said, surprised by how little her reaction hurt now. The choice is yours. The weeks following my confrontation transformed the Thompson family in ways none of us could have predicted. My mother initially refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, falling back on her usual tactics of deflection and gaslighting. I always supported you, she insisted during our first awkward phone call. If you felt invisible, that was your perception, not reality. When I calmly presented specific examples, birthdays forgotten, achievements dismissed, the constant comparisons to my siblings, she grew defensive, then hostile, finally hanging up with a curt, "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." My father, ever the pragmatist, approached the situation like a business negotiation. He scheduled a meeting with me at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between my hotel and his office. He brought a legal pad with talking points. I've been reviewing your statements, he said stiffly. While I don't agree with all of your characterizations, I acknowledge that your experience in the family was not what it should have been. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from him. Progress, albeit minimal. Emma surprised me the most. She showed up at my hotel room the day after the confrontation, eyes red from crying. I knew, she admitted as we sat awkwardly on the edge of the bed. I always knew you were being treated differently, and I never said anything. I benefited from it, and I let it happen. Her honesty opened the door to our first real conversation as adults, painful, halting, but genuine. She shared her own insecurities, the pressure she felt to maintain her perfect image, her envy of my quiet strength. You always seemed so self-contained, she said wonderingly. Like you didn't need anyone's approval. I laughed through tears. I was dying for approval. I just knew I'd never get it, so I stopped showing that I wanted it. Jason's response was the most volatile. He swung between defensive anger, "You could have just talked to us instead of disappearing," and genuine remorse. During one heated phone call, he admitted, "I thought you were the lucky one. No pressure, no expectations. I never realized that was worse." The return of my grandmother's bracelet came with his first sincere apology. "Mom gave this to Melissa without telling any of us where it went. I got it back for you." Extended family caught wind of the situation, creating ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. Grandmother Ruth, my mother's mother, reached out directly, something she'd never done before. "Your mother gets it from me, you know," she said bluntly during our first phone call. "I did the same to her that she did to you. Different ways, same damage. Doesn't excuse it, but might help explain it." Ruth's unexpected alliance became a source of comfort and perspective. At 83, she had the wisdom of hindsight and the candor of someone with nothing to lose. "Margaret's afraid of you because you see her clearly. Always has been." My parents' social circle fractured along predictable lines. Some rallied around my mother's version of events, the ungrateful daughter, the family drama queen. Others, particularly those who had always seen through the Thompson family facade, reached out with their own stories of feeling marginalized or dismissed. "Your mother did the same to me in the garden committee," confided Mrs. Blackwell, my mother's supposed best friend. 30 years I put up with it. Good for you for not waiting that long." The family therapy sessions were excruciating. Dr. Winters, a no-nonsense family therapist recommended by Dr. Martin, refused to let anyone hide behind politeness or deflection. "Margaret, when Abigail describes feeling invisible in the family, what feelings come up for you?" she asked during our third session. My mother, who had agreed to therapy only under duress, shifted uncomfortably. "I think she's exaggerating. All children feel overlooked sometimes. That's not a feeling. That's a judgment," Dr. Winters countered. "Try again." After several false starts, my mother finally whispered, "Failure. I feel like a failure." The admission cracked something open. For the first time, I glimpsed the wounded woman beneath my mother's perfect exterior, someone who measured her worth entirely by how others perceived her, who had created a family for display rather than connection. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it. Understanding, I was learning, was not the same as forgiveness, but it was a necessary first step. My father had his own breakthrough several sessions later. After listening to me describe how his emotional absence had affected me, he broke down completely the first time I had ever seen him cry. "I didn't know how to connect with you," he admitted. "Emma was easy. She was just like me. Jason was all charm, like my brother. But you were quiet, watchful. I didn't know what to do with that, so I did nothing. I'm so sorry, Abby." The hardest part was maintaining my boundaries. Each breakthrough was followed by pressure to return to old patterns, my mother's subtle guilt trips, my father's attempts to solve everything with money, my siblings' impatience with the pace of reconciliation. "I'm not moving back to Boston," I repeated during a particularly difficult family dinner. "My life is in Portland now. That's non-negotiable." "But how will we fix things if you're so far away?" my mother protested. "Distance isn't what broke this family," I replied. "Presence without connection did that." I returned to Portland after 3 weeks, emotionally exhausted but clearer than I'd ever been about my place in the family and the world. Jillian welcomed me back with a small party at the bookstore. Mrs. Reynolds had kept Gatsby fed and spoiled. Dr. Martin helped me process the whirlwind of confrontation and partial reconciliation. "Families don't heal overnight," she reminded me. "You've started a process that will take years, with setbacks and progress in equal measure." Over the following months, I established new patterns of communication with my family. Weekly video calls with Emma, who is making a genuine effort to build a real relationship. Monthly calls with my father, who was working with his own therapist on emotional expression. Occasional text exchanges with Jason, who was still figuring out who he wanted to be. My mother remained the most resistant to change. Her participation in family therapy grew increasingly reluctant until she stopped attending altogether. Our interactions remained formal and infrequent, though I noticed small shifts. She asked questions about my life occasionally, made fewer comparisons between me and my siblings, Sent a thoughtful birthday gift to my new address. Grandmother Ruth moved to a retirement community just outside Portland, claiming the weather was better for her arthritis. We both knew the real reason. At her housewarming party, she raised a glass and announced, "To second chances and new beginnings. Sometimes you have to break a family to fix it." I couldn't have said it better myself. Number 9. The Renaissance. 1 year to the day after my mother's devastating joke at the family dinner, I stood in my new apartment in Portland's Pearl District, surrounded by friends and chosen family, celebrating not just my birthday but my rebirth. My first book, The Invisible Daughter, had been accepted for publication the previous week, a memoir disguised as fiction about a woman who disappears from her family to find herself. The irony of becoming an author after years as an editor wasn't lost on me. Finally, I was telling my own story instead of polishing others. Jillian had brought an elaborate cake from our favorite bakery. Mrs. Reynolds, who insisted I now call her Frances, had knitted me a beautiful blue shawl. My writing group members had collaborated on a scrapbook of our year together. Dr. Martin had sent flowers with a card that simply read, "Proud of you." And then there was Nathan Reed, who had left his private investigation career to pursue his long-deferred dream of writing crime novels. Our relationship had evolved from an unlikely professional encounter to friendship to something deeper and more promising. He understood boundaries and respect in ways that made me feel safe opening my heart again. "Speech," Jillian called out, raising her glass of champagne. I looked around at the faces of people who truly saw me, people who had chosen me, and whom I had chosen in return. "A year ago today," I began. "I was told that if I disappeared, no one would miss me." It was both the most painful thing I'd ever heard and the most liberating. It forced me to ask, what if that were true? And if it were, what did that say about the life I was living? I took a sip of champagne, gathering my thoughts. My journey wasn't about being missed. It was about finding myself after years of invisibility. It was about discovering that being seen, truly seen, is a basic human need, not a luxury. Nathan squeezed my hand gently. "I've learned that family comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the people who share your DNA. Sometimes it's the people who share your journey. Sometimes it's both. I'm grateful for all of you who have become my chosen family, and for the biological family members who are working to earn a place in my life again." As if on cue, my phone chimed with a text message. I glanced down to see it was from my mother, an unprecedented occurrence. It read simply, "Happy birthday, Abigail. I've started therapy. Too little, too late, perhaps, but I'm trying." The message stunned me. In a year of reconciliation attempts and boundary setting, this was the first time my mother had acknowledged her role without qualification or excuse. I continued my speech, emotion making my voice slightly unsteady. "The past year has taught me that sometimes disappearing isn't about being missed. Sometimes it's about finding yourself, and sometimes, when you find yourself, others find you too, the real you, not the version they wanted you to be." I raised my glass. To visibility, to authenticity, to becoming the author of your own story. My family's evolution continued. Imperfect but real. Emma had given birth to a daughter 3 months earlier and named her Abigail, a gesture that had moved me to tears. She was determined her daughter would never feel invisible or overlooked. Jason had stepped back from his startup to reassess his priorities, volunteering with a literacy program similar to the one I worked with. "You inspired me," he admitted during one of our increasingly comfortable phone calls. "I want to build something meaningful, not just profitable." My father had retired from his law practice, startling everyone who had assumed he would work until he physically couldn't anymore. "I missed too much already," he explained when I expressed surprise. "I don't want to miss whatever time we have left to know each other." The most unexpected development had been the tentative thaw between my mother and me. Her text on my birthday had been followed by a handwritten letter, the first personal, non-occasion correspondence I'd ever received from her. "I was raised to believe that appearances were everything," she wrote in her precise handwriting. "I passed that poison on to you, the child who saw through the facade. I punished you for your clarity of vision. I cannot undo that damage, but I am finally facing it. Too late for the mother-daughter relationship we should have had, perhaps, but not too late for whatever relationship might still be possible." I hadn't responded immediately, giving myself time to process her words and consult with Dr. Martin. When I did reply, I chose compassionate detachment, acknowledging her effort without promising more than I could give. "Thank you for your honesty," I wrote. "I believe people can change when they truly want to. Time will tell what relationship is possible for us, but I appreciate your willingness to try." As my birthday celebration wound down, Nathan and I stood on my small balcony overlooking the city lights. Gatsby wound around our ankles, purring contentedly. "Happy?" Nathan asked simply. I considered the question seriously. "Whole," I answered finally. "I feel whole." Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I caught sight of a framed photo on my nightstand, Emma's baby daughter, my namesake. Beside it sat my grandmother's silver bracelet, which would someday go to little Abigail. The tangible symbols of continuation and change reminded me that families, like individuals, could evolve if given the chance and the choice. My mother had been wrong that night a year ago. If I disappeared, I would be missed by people who truly knew me and valued me. But she had also, unwittingly, been right. I had needed to disappear to find myself, to break free of the invisible constraints that had defined me for 28 years. Sometimes you have to disappear to finally be seen. Has someone in your family ever made you feel invisible or unimportant? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If my journey of setting boundaries and finding self-worth resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be seen and valued. Thank you for being part of my journey. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we're born into. Until next time, this is Abigail Thompson, finally visible and telling my own story.